What if the only hope for your dying child came from a 9-year-old with duct-taped boots, dirt-streaked cheeks, and a gift no doctor could explain? What if he was right? The Birmingham morning bit like a blade, the kind of cold that clawed at your fingertips and turned your breath into fleeting clouds. The Children's Medical Center on 7th Avenue thrummed with restless energy. Scarves knotted tight, coffee cups gripped like talismans, people hurrying through the revolving doors, as if they could outrun the weight of why they were there. Amid the rush, one figure stayed still, a quiet island in the chaos. Ezekiel Zeke Carter, just 9 years old, sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, his small frame swallowed by an oversized coat, sleeves rolled up to free his hands. One boot bore a jagged stripe of duct tape across the toe, and a red beanie sagged low over his ears, barely shielding them from the chill. In his lap, a weather-beaten notebook lay open, his pencil scratching softly as he sketched. Faces, hands, moments stolen from the crowd. He didn't beg, didn't speak, didn't even look up unless someone met his gaze. His eyes, sharp and old beyond his years, watched the world with a quiet intensity, as if he could see the secrets people carried in their hurried steps. Zeke was a ghost to most, a Saturday fixture outside the hospital's glass doors. When he first appeared months ago, staff had tried to shoo him off, their voices sharp with suspicion. But Zeke's soft smile and softer replies disarmed them. He caused no trouble, just sat there sketching or staring, his presence as unobtrusive as the frost on the pavement. Some whispered he had a sick parent inside, maybe a sibling, or was waiting for a ride that never came. In a place where pain hung heavy, no one asked too many questions. Assumptions were easier than truths. Across the street, a dark silver Range Rover idled, its engine a low hum against the morning's edge. Inside sat Jonathan Reeves, late 40s, his jaw sharp but shadowed by sleepless nights. His tie hung loose, his collar creased, his wealth evident in the car's sleek shine but absent in his eyes. They were hollow, drained by a grief he couldn't name. In the back seat, strapped into a booster seat, was his daughter, Isa, 6 years. Old, her brown curls tucked behind one ear, a pink blanket draped over legs that no longer answered her. Once, she'd been a whirlwind, climbing trees, racing cousins, her laughter a song that filled their home. Then came the accident, a cruel thief that stole her movement and left her silent, her wide eyes fixed on nothing, as if searching for the girl she used to be. Jonathan's hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, as if holding tight could keep his world from unraveling. He stepped out, the cold slapping his face, and opened the back door. Scooping Isa into his arms, he held her close, her slight frame too light, too fragile, as if she might dissolve if he let go. His steps were deliberate, his focus on the hospital doors, on the next appointment, the next round of tests, the next hollow promise of progress. He didn't see Zeke at first. Most didn't. But Zeke saw him. He saw the way Jonathan's shoulders hunched, carrying not just his daughter but a mountain of despair. He saw Isa's eyes drifting upward to the gray sky, avoiding the hospital's sterile glare. Zeke's pencil paused, his gaze lingering longer than usual, something stirring in his chest. A pull, a purpose. As Jonathan neared the doors, Zeke stood, his small frame steady despite the wind tugging at his coat. His voice, soft but clear, sliced through the morning's hum. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan stopped dead, his boots rooted to the pavement. Not because the words were absurd, though they were, but because of how they were said. Not a plea, not a boast, but a quiet certainty, like a truth carved in stone. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing, searching the boy's face. "What did you say?" Zeke didn't flinch, his notebook tucked under one arm. "I said, I can help." Her walk again. Jonathan's arms tightened around Isa, her warmth the only anchor keeping him grounded. "That's not funny, kid," he said, his voice low, edged with warning. "I ain't joking." Zeke's tone didn't waver, his eyes, steady behind the cracked lenses dangling from his shirt collar. There was no smile, no hint of childish mischief, just a stillness that felt too big for a boy in taped-up boots. Jonathan's gaze swept over him, the oversized coat, the duct tape, the beanie slipping over his ears. This had to be a scam, a cruel trick preying on desperate parents. Or maybe the kid was just delusional, lost in some fantasy. But something in Zeke's voice, its calm, its weight, clung to Jonathan like damp cold, impossible to shake. He turned away, carrying Isa. Inside, the glass doors swallowing them into the hospital's fluorescent hum. But as he walked, Zeke's words looped in his mind, relentless, like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. Inside, the hospital was a maze of antiseptic smells and muted voices. Jonathan sat through the usual routine, therapists with clipboards, neurologists with guarded optimism, all delivering the same tired script. Manage expectations, long road ahead, miracles take time. He nodded, his face a mask, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "I can make your daughter walk again." The words weren't hopeful or desperate, they were certain, spoken with a conviction that made his chest ache. He glanced at Isa, her eyes fixed. On the ceiling tiles, her silence louder than any cry. What did this kid know? Nothing. He was nobody, just a boy with a notebook and nowhere else to go. But as the hours dragged on, Zeke's voice refused to fade. It was absurd, reckless even, to entertain the idea. Jonathan had seen every specialist, chased every treatment, spent sleepless nights scouring medical journals for a shred of hope. Yet none of them had spoken with the quiet fire of a 9-year-old outside a hospital. By early afternoon, as he carried Isa back to the car, the sun had clawed through the clouds, casting a brittle light over the parking lot. Zeke was still there on his cardboard throne, pencil moving across a new page. His eyes lifted, locking onto Jonathan's, not with expectation but with knowing, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Jonathan slowed, his arms aching under Isa's weight, though it wasn't her body that felt heavy. It was the pull of that boy's words, the impossible promise that refused to let go. He glanced at Isa, her head resting on his shoulder, eyes closed, her face pale and still. She was too light, too fragile, a shadow of the girl who used to race through their backyard. He turned, his voice gruff. "You again," he said, stepping closer. "Why'd you say that? You think this is a game?" Zeke shook his head, his beanie slipping slightly. "No, sir." "You don't know her," Jonathan snapped, easing Isa into her booster seat, his hands careful but trembling. "You don't know what she's been through. What we've been through." Zeke stood, his small frame unwavering. "I don't need to know her to help." Jonathan straightened, his laugh sharp and bitter. "You're what, 9? "Almost 10, Zeke said, his fingers tracing the frayed edge of his notebook. "My mama was a physical therapist. She taught me things, said the body remembers, even when it forgets for a while." The words hit like a punch, not because they made sense, but because they carried a weight Jonathan couldn't dismiss. "What? You watched her do some stretches and now you think you're a doctor?" he scoffed, his voice louder than he meant. "She helped a man that was paralyzed walk after 5 years in a chair," Zeke said, his eyes lifting to meet Jonathan's. No machines, no nurses, just her hands, her patience, and faith. Jonathan opened his mouth, then stopped. A nurse passing by gave Zeke a small wave, her smile familiar, not pitying. A janitor nodded in the boy's direction, a quiet acknowledgement. They knew him, trusted him, in a way that made Jonathan's skepticism waver. He crossed his arms, his voice dropping. "I'm not giving you money." "Didn't ask for any," Zeke said, his tone as steady as ever. "Then what do you want?" Jonathan's voice cracked, betraying the desperation he tried to hide. Zeke stepped closer, his small boots scuffing the pavement. "1 hour. Let me show you." Jonathan glanced at Issa, her eyes now open, watching them both with a quiet curiosity that pierced his heart. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his mind screaming to walk away, to call security, to end this madness. But something held him. Maybe the way Zeke stood, unflinching, or the way Issa's gaze lingered on the boy, as if she saw something her father couldn't. "Fine," he muttered, almost to himself. "Harrington Park, tomorrow noon. Don't be late." Zeke nodded once, his face unreadable. "I'll be there." Jonathan climbed into the SUV, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. But in the rearview mirror, Zeke stood like a sentinel, hands at his sides, his small figure a stubborn mark against the gray morning. The image burned into Jonathan's mind, a question he couldn't answer. That night, in the dim glow of his home office, Jonathan sat surrounded by chaos, papers strewn across his desk, contracts untouched, his phone buzzing with emails he ignored. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment outside the hospital. "I can make your daughter walk again." The words were absurd, impossible, yet they carried a weight that made his chest ache. He tried to focus, to drown them out, but they looped, relentless like a song stuck in his head. Issa's voice broke the silence, soft and tentative from the doorway. "Daddy?" He turned, startled. "Yeah, baby?" Who was that boy? He hesitated, his throat tight. "Just someone we met outside the hospital." She wheeled closer, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes searching his. He looked like he believed it. "Believed what?" Jonathan asked, though he knew the answer. "That I could walk." The words hung in the air, simple but shattering. Issa's fingers moved across the armrest of her wheelchair, a slow, deliberate dance, as if testing the idea of movement. A faint smile curved her lips, the first he'd seen in months, and it cracked something inside him. For the first time since the accident, he felt something dangerous stirring. Not just hope, but a spark of possibility, fragile and terrifying. Harrington Park was a forgotten corner of Birmingham, its cracked basketball court and squeaky swings, ignored by most. But on Sunday, it was Zeke's domain. He sat on a bench by the big oak tree, his oversized jacket draped over his shoulders, his gym bag at his feet. A folded towel lay beside him, next to a bottle of water and a small pile of supplies that looked out of place in a park. Socks, a tennis ball, a jar of cocoa butter, a cloth-wrapped container that radiated warmth. He was early, his pencil moving, across his notebook, capturing the slant of light through the branches. The air was warmer today, but he wore his jacket still, his mama's helper's coat, a talisman that kept her close. At 12:07, Jonathan's SUV rolled up, the engine cutting through the park's quiet. He didn't speak as he lifted Issa from the back seat, setting her gently in her wheelchair. His arms were crossed tight, his face a mask of regret, as if he'd already decided this was a mistake. But Issa's eyes were bright, her curls bouncing as she looked at Zeke, a shy smile breaking through. Zeke stood, his voice polite but warm. "Hi again." Jonathan gave a stiff nod, barely meeting his eyes. Issa waved, her voice soft but eager. "Hi?" Zeke smiled, kneeling to her level. "Hi, Issa." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "How'd you know her name?" "You said it yesterday," Zeke said simply, his fingers brushing the edge of his notebook. "I remember stuff." Jonathan gestured at the towel, his tone sharp. "So, what now? Magic carpet ride?" Zeke ignored the jab, unzipping his bag to reveal his mother's tools. Socks, a tennis ball, cocoa butter, the warm rice pack. "Mama's stuff," he said. "Rice for heat, ball for pressure points." Jonathan's arms stayed crossed, his skepticism a wall. Zeke turned to Issa, his voice gentle but firm. "Can I work with your legs? Nothing hurts, I promise. If it feels weird, just say stop." Issa glanced at her dad, her eyes wide with a mix of trust and uncertainty. Jonathan sighed, his voice low. "You can try. Be careful." Zeke knelt beside her chair, carefully unwrapping the blanket from her legs. He placed the warm rice pack over her thighs, watching her face. She flinched slightly. "Too hot?" he asked, his voice soft as a whisper. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. "Feels good?" He nodded, waiting, letting the warmth sink in. Then he began moving her legs. Small, gentle rotations. No force. Just a quiet rhythm. Like a dance, only he could hear. Jonathan watched, his eyes sharp, ready to pounce if anything went wrong. But nothing did. Zeke's hands were steady, his focus absolute, as if the world had shrunk to just him and Issa. "You done this before?" Jonathan asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Zeke didn't look up. "Mama took me to shelters after school, helped veterans, folks who couldn't pay, said everybody deserves to feel human again. I carried her bag." Jonathan's eyebrow arched. "And she taught you this stuff?" "Yeah," Zeke said, his hands still moving. "Said the body don't need fancy, just attention." He tapped Issa's knee lightly. "Feel that?" "No," she whispered, her voice small but not defeated. "That's okay," Zeke said, unfazed. "I'll keep asking." He kept talking to her, his voice a steady hum. Favorite colors? Purple. Favorite food? Mac and cheese. Favorite show? Something about unicorns. At first, her answers were short, guarded, but soon she was asking him questions, her voice growing brighter, like a flower unfurling in the sun. "Do you live around here?" "Kind of." "Go to school?" "Used to." "Why not anymore?" Zeke paused, his hands stilling for a moment. "Mama got sick, then she passed. Been figuring things out since." Issa's face fell, her eyes soft with empathy. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," Zeke said, his smile small but real. Jonathan's posture softened, his arms loosening, but he stayed silent, watching. 30 minutes in, Zeke tapped Issa's ankle. "Feel that?" She blinked, her eyes widening. "A little, like pressure." Zeke glanced at Jonathan, a spark in his gaze. "That's good." Jonathan's voice was cautious. "She says that in therapy sometimes." "Yeah," Zeke said, nodding. "But therapy's got machines, beeping, people in white coats. Kids get scared, tighten up. Here." He gestured to the park, the open sky, the rustling trees. "Feels different." Jonathan didn't respond, but his eyes lingered on the trees, the air, the boy who seemed to carry a world of wisdom in his small frame. For the first time, he wasn't just watching, he was listening. As the session ended, Zeke packed his bag, his movements careful, deliberate. Issa smiled, her face brighter than it had been in months. Jonathan lifted her into the car, his mind a tangle of doubt and something else, something that felt like hope, sharp and unfamiliar. He glanced back at Zeke, still standing by the bench, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Same time next week?" Zeke asked, his voice steady. Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. "Don't be late." Zeke's lips curved, just slightly. "I won't." As the SUV pulled away, Jonathan stole one last glance in the rearview mirror. Zeke stood under the oak, small but unyielding, a boy who carried a promise too big for his taped-up boots. And in that moment, Jonathan felt it, a crack in the wall. He'd built around his heart, a whisper of possibility that scared him more than anything else. The sun hung low over Harrington Park, painting the cracked basketball court and squeaky swings in a soft gold that felt like a promise. Zeke Carter sat on his usual bench by the big oak, his oversized jacket, his mama's helper's coat, draped over his shoulders like a shield. The air was warmer now, carrying the faint sweetness of spring, but the chill of Birmingham's winter still lingered in his bones, a reminder of harder days. His gym bag rested at his feet, its contents meticulously arranged. A folded towel, a pair of socks, a tennis ball, a jar of cocoa butter, and a cloth-wrapped pack of warm rice that radiated a gentle heat. His weather-beaten notebook lay open. In his lap, his pencil tracing the curve of a tree branch, but his eyes kept drifting to the park's entrance, waiting. Always waiting. Zeke was early, as he always was. His small frame a quiet anchor in the park's stillness. The world felt different here. Open, alive, unlike the sterile hum of the Children's Medical Center where he'd first seen Jonathan Reeves and his daughter Isa. That moment, just a week ago, had shifted something inside him, like a key turning in a lock. He'd seen the way Jonathan carried Isa, his arms tight with fear, and the way her eyes searched the sky, as if looking for a piece of herself she'd lost. When he'd spoken those words, "I can make your daughter walk again," he hadn't planned them. They'd spilled out, raw and certain, a truth he felt in his marrow. Now, as he waited, his heart thrummed with a mix of hope and dread. What if they didn't come? What if they did? At exactly noon, the familiar hum of Jonathan's silver Range Rover broke the park's quiet, its tires crunching on gravel. Zeke's pencil stilled, his breath catching as the SUV rolled to a stop. Jonathan stepped out, his face less heavy than last week, though his eyes still carried the weight of a man who'd forgotten how to hope. He lifted Isa from the back seat, her brown curls bouncing, her pink blanket draped over her legs. But today she was grinning before her wheelchair, even touched the ground, her eyes bright with something new, anticipation. Zeke waved, his voice soft but warm. "Hi, Isa." "Hi," she chirped, her voice a spark that lit the air. Jonathan gave a small nod, no words, but it was more than last week's guarded silence. He wheeled Isa over, his posture looser, though. His arms stayed crossed, a reflex of distrust. Zeke stood, brushing off his jacket. "Ready?" Isa's thumbs shot up, her grin widening. "Let's do it." Jonathan's eyebrow arched, but he said nothing, his gaze flicking between his daughter's smile and the boy who seemed to carry a secret too big for his taped-up boots. Zeke knelt beside Isa's chair, his movements careful, reverent, like he was handling something sacred. He unwrapped her blanket, placed the warm rice pack over her thighs, and watched her face. "Feels okay?" he asked, his voice a gentle anchor. "Feels good," she said, her eyes locked on his, trusting. He began the routine. Slow rotations of her legs, small stretches, his hands steady but never forceful. The park seemed to hold its breath, the distant bark of a dog and the laughter of kids on the basketball court fading into a soft hum. Jonathan stood behind them, his arms still crossed, but his eyes were sharper now, tracking every movement, every flicker of Isa's expression. Last week, he'd been ready to pounce, to end this experiment at the first sign of trouble. Today, he was watching for something else, a sign, a spark, anything to justify the dangerous hope blooming in his chest. Zeke's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "You ever do this with your mama?" he asked Isa, his hands guiding, her ankle in a slow circle. "Before the accident," she said, her voice small but clear. "She used to stretch with me before dance class. Said it made me stronger." Zeke nodded, his eyes warm. "It does. Your muscles still know how. They're just waiting for you to remind them." Jonathan's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. He remembered those dance classes, Isa's tiny leotard, her laughter as she twirled across the studio. That was before. Before the crash, before the hospital. Before their world became a maze of wheelchairs and whispered prognoses. He cleared, his throat, his voice rough. "Why do you do this, kid? What's in it for you?" Zeke glanced up, his hands still working. "Mama used to say helping people makes them feel like they matter. That's what she did. I want to do that too." Jonathan's arms loosened, his skepticism wavering. "You're 9. You could be playing, going to school, doing kid stuff." "Almost 10, Zeke corrected, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I do this 'cause it feels right." Jonathan didn't reply, but his eyes lingered on Zeke, searching for the crack in the boy's resolve, the lie that would prove this was all a fantasy. But Zeke's face was open, unguarded, his focus on Issa Absolute. He tapped her ankle lightly. "Feel that?" "A little," she said, her voice brighter, her eyes wide with surprise. "Like last time, but stronger." Zeke nodded, his smile small but real. "That's good. Your brain's talking to your legs again." Jonathan's breath caught, his hands dropping to his sides. "She says that in therapy sometimes," he said, his voice cautious, as if afraid to believe. "Yeah," Zeke said, his eyes on Issa's legs. "But therapy's all machines and timers. Kids feel like projects. Here, it's just us, the air, the trees. It's easier to try when you're not scared." Jonathan's gaze drifted to the oak tree, its branches swaying gently, and for a moment, he felt it, the difference. The hospital was a cage of beeps and sterile walls, but here the world felt alive, open, full of possibility. He didn't speak, but he was listening now. Really listening. The session stretched on, Zeke guiding Issa through toe flexes, his voice a steady hum of encouragement. She asked him questions about his favorite color, blue, his favorite food, his mama's cornbread, why he always wore that jacket. "Mama called it my helper's coat," he said, his voice soft. "Said every healer needs something to remind them why they care." Issa's eyes lit up. "I have a jacket like that. It's pink with stars. Daddy got it for me." Jonathan's chest ached, remembering the day he'd bought that jacket, back when Issa's laughter filled their house. He looked away, blinking, hard as Zeke showed Issa how to wiggle her toes. Nothing dramatic happened, but her face didn't dim. She was trying, really trying, and that alone felt like a miracle. As they packed up, Jonathan crouched beside Zeke, his voice low. "Where do you go after this?" Zeke shrugged, zipping his bag. "Around." "You got a place to sleep?" Zeke hesitated, his eyes flicking to the ground. "Sometimes." Jonathan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. The boy's answer wasn't a surprise, but it hit like a stone. "You ever think about staying with us? Just for a while?" Zeke's eyes widened, his hands stilling. "You serious?" "We got a guest room. You wouldn't be in the way." Zeke looked at his boots, the duct tape fraying at the edges. "You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me?" Jonathan gave a short laugh, the sound raw but real. "After what you're doing for Issa, they'd better not say a word." Zeke didn't answer right away, his fingers tracing the strap of his bag. But Jonathan saw it. The wheels turning, the spark of something he hadn't dared to hope for. Trust. The next morning, Zeke stood outside Jonathan's house on Crestview Drive, his backpack slung over one shoulder, a rolled-up blanket tucked under his arm. The house was a world away from the shelters and street corners he knew, brick, tidy lawn, windows that glowed with warmth. Jonathan opened the door, sweatpants and a coffee mug in hand, his face softer than Zeke had ever seen it. "Right on time," he said. Issa wheeled to the hallway, her voice a burst of light. "Zeke!" "Hey, superstar," he said, his smile breaking through. Jonathan stepped aside. "Welcome home." The word, home, hit Zeke like a wave, unfamiliar and heavy. He stepped inside, his boots scuffing the hardwood, and for the first time in months he felt something close to safe. The guest room was small but soft, clean sheets, a desk, a window that let in the morning light. He didn't say much, just set his bag down and nodded, but his eyes lingered on the bed, the kind of comfort he'd almost forgotten. Days turned to weeks, and the house on Crestview Drive began to hum with life. Zeke never missed a morning stretch with Asa, his hands guiding her legs with the same care he'd learned from his mama. Her feet moved now, small twitches at first, then deliberate slides, her brain reaching for her muscles like a hand grasping in the dark. Jonathan watched, his skepticism fading, replaced by a quiet awe. One night, as he washed dishes, he paused, his hands still in the soapy water. "Zeke," he called over his shoulder. Zeke looked up from his sketching at the kitchen table. "Yeah? You ever think about going back to school?" "Sometimes," Zeke said, his pencil pausing. "You're smart," Jonathan said, turning to face him. "You could go far." Zeke tilted his head, his eyes distant. "I want to help people walk again like Mama did." Jonathan nodded, his throat tight. "Then we'll figure out how to get you there." They didn't say much more that night, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of footsteps, laughter, the scratch of Zeke's pencil, the small noises of a house healing, word, spread like wildfire. A nurse walking her dog through Harrington Park one Sunday spotted Isa, her knees lifting, her toes moving, Zeke at her side. She told her sister in patient services, who told a physical therapist, who cornered Jonathan at the hospital. "Is it true? Isa's improving?" Jonathan nodded, his voice quiet. "Yeah, thanks to someone we didn't expect." By the next Sunday, Harrington Park was different. Two families waited by the oak tree, a boy with a walker, his eyes wary, and a girl recovering from a stroke, her mother clutching her hand. They'd heard about the kid who helped the Reeves girl move again. Zeke looked at Jonathan, his eyes wide with something like fear but also resolve. "You don't have to," Jonathan said softly. Zeke adjusted his bag's strap. "I want to." He gave up his time with Isa that day, kneeling beside the boy, showing his parents how to stretch his legs, how to warm the rice pack just right. He spoke to the kids, not at them, his voice steady. "You're not broken," he told the girl, her eyes locked on his. "You're just learning a new way to be strong." Isa watched from her wheelchair, her hands folded, her smile soft. On the drive home, she looked at Jonathan in the rearview mirror. "I like watching him help people." Jonathan's heart swelled, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in months. Zeke wasn't just healing legs, he was mending something deeper, something broken in them all. And as the SUV rolled down Crestview Drive, the park fading, behind them, Jonathan realized the truth. This boy, with his taped-up boots and quiet fire, had given them back their hope, their home, their fight.